Hey everybody, welcome to the third episode of the Trigger Words podcast. You're joining me live on Facebook. I'm also going to be recording this as a podcast, but you're kind of getting the pre-show right now for tuning in. I still haven't figured out what schedule I'm going to be doing these live events and when I'm going to be releasing the podcast. So again, you got feedback, let me know. You guys' support for the first two episodes has been amazing. It actually makes me a little nervous because I don't know what I'm supposed to do to live up to the hype that you guys are doing. The downloads are off the charts. Being part of the Firearms Radio Network clearly has an advantage. You guys are amazing. And now I promised Sean Heron, who runs the Firearms Radio Network, some pretty lofty goals by the end of the year. So if you like what you're hearing here, especially on the live stuff, and you like interacting, you've got to go tell somebody about it. I'm going to say that again when I do the podcast, but that's the way you can say thanks for this free education, free show is one, listen to our sponsors once I start putting sponsors on here. Yeah, they're coming, sorry. But two is tell a friend. If you can get other people to download the show, that's the stats that matter to us. That's what shows us you're liking what's going on. Besides the feedback, of course, is great. We really appreciate it. But the sharing the word, sending the links out on social media, just telling people to download it. We called it Trigger Words on purpose to make it memorable. Yeah, so I appreciate it. See what you guys can do. I'm just making a note right here what I can do for the podcast so I know what I'm doing for recording. And let's get to it. Here's the podcast. Welcome to Trigger Words. This show is brought to you by the Firearms Radio Network and is presented by Rocket FFL. It is your best source for getting your FFL and staying compliant with ATF rules and regulations. This podcast focuses on the legal side of gun ownership in the firearms industry. We talk about guns, law, and politics. I'm your host, Ryan Kleckner. I'm a firearms attorney, but I'm not your attorney. Therefore, everything we discuss in this podcast is for your information and entertainment only and is not legal advice. The views and comments expressed in this podcast belong solely to the host and guests and do not necessarily reflect the official position or views of the Firearms Radio Network and or its employees. Listener discretion is advised, especially on the live shows. So in episode number 2, the last episode, we started with the absolute basics. We got into the definition of what a firearm is. Hopefully you guys learned something there. I got a lot of good feedback about, wow, kind of the basics do matter. And you're right, they do. If you're going to be in the gun industry, if you're going to be maybe getting your own FFL because you want to start making money with guns on the side and get an FFL at your house, you're going to need to know a lot of these laws we're going to talk about for the industry. But even just as a gun owner, you need to know what these laws are because you never know when you might be or someone in your family might be a prohibited person. Any one of those classes of people that we'll cover on a future episode that can't possess firearms. Well, you need to know not only what those categories of people are, you need to know what a firearm is. As a matter of fact, another topic we're going to cover is ammunition. And we get down to the fact that every component of ammunition is ammunition under federal law. So yes, a felon can get in trouble for just having a piece of brass in their car. And you also could get into trouble by selling someone under 21 handgun brass. They go to the store and you get a piece of 45 brass. Well, they're not allowed to have handgun ammunition. That's ammunition. So there's all sorts of nuances we can cover there. The point is, you've got to start here at the basics, and we're going to slowly build on these. And we talked already about the definition of a rifle and a shotgun. Trust me, we will expand on those so much more. So as we get into these future episodes, even starting now with episode 3, if you missed 2, please go back. Guys, this is one of those podcasts. I'm going to love it if you just jump in and join us midstream, but you're going to be lost. And that's because I'll try and go back and get some of the basics again, but I can't possibly tell you everything that we covered before, or else the podcast would just get infinitely longer each time. So again, go back through. I'm trying to present things in a certain order the best I can to help you understand what's going on. So last week we did a whole bunch of teaching. I talked about the codes and the difference between laws and regulations, and I even mentioned that what we call Title I of our firearms laws is really the more recent laws. They came out later, or second, but we call them Title I. And Title II, which is the National Firearms Act, which came out a lot earlier, is called the second one, but even though it was the first one. But so Title I is standard firearms, your rifles, your shotguns, handguns. They're what we call Gun Control Act or GCA firearms. And Title II are your NFA or National Firearms Act firearms. They're machine guns, short-barreled rifles, short-barreled shotguns, silencers. Yes, they're silencers. I'm a lawyer. The law says silencers. That's what I call them. But if it drives you nuts, maybe I'll teach myself to call them suppressors for you. But all those things are in the National Firearms Act. Those are Title II type firearms. Here's a pet peeve of mine. They are not called Class 3 firearms. Well, I take that back. Yes, they are called that all the time. But they're not Class 3 firearms. There's no such thing as a Class 3 firearm. Now, let's talk about why real quick. If I'm going to detour here, I might as well commit to it and tell you guys why that bothers me. Class 3 is the type of SOT you become. Oh, okay. So now I just got even further off track. Let's go some more bases. You get an FFL. An FFL is a federal firearms license. So you get a federal firearms license. Okay. You become an SOT. You don't get an SOT. You become an SOT. SOT stands for Special Occupational Taxpayer. It is the type of taxpayer you become. Now, there's 3 different classes of SOT that you can become. There's Class 1, which is for importing NFA firearms. There's Class 2, which is for manufacturing NFA firearms. And there's Class 3, which is for selling NFA firearms. So you might go to what we sometimes call a Class 3 dealer. Well, he's not really a Class 3 dealer. That person is a firearms dealer because they probably have a Type 1 FFL. And they're also an SOT, so they're allowed to sell NFA firearms. And what class SOT are they? Well, they're Class 3. They are Class 3, not the NFA firearm. And why does that matter? Well, that NFA firearm, the very NFA firearm being sold by the Class 3 dealer, was made by a Class 2 manufacturer. So if there was anything about the identity of the NFA firearm that you wanted to associate with a Class 2 might be better, don't call it Class 3. That's just the seller. The Class 2 is the one that made it, or the Class 1 is the one that brought it in. So the point is the class number changes even with the same firearm as it changes hand because it's not associated with the firearm, it's associated with the seller. Okay, rant over, maybe. Don't call them Class 3 firearms. Call them NFA firearms or Title II or something like that. All right, so we talked about the titles. We talked about the basic definitions of a firearm. I teased a little bit about the 80% receivers. That's another podcast. I mean, man, tonight's podcast alone, I have the next 10 or 15 podcasts covered for topics. And you guys let me know when you're listening to this, remind me if there is something that I cover that you're lost on, that doesn't make sense, or is a nuance that you would like to hear, because I'd be more than happy to cover it. So how does silencers fit into tonight? Well, we're going to cover 2 products tonight. We're going to apply what we learned last episode about the definition of a firearm and the exemptions to firearms, like muzzle loaders, things that are non-firearms. We're going to cover how that applies to a couple products. Well, the silencers for one product and the definition of a handgun is the second product. That's your T's. The first product is the SilencerCo Maxim50. That came out very recently, and man, I was so excited to see that thing come out. It was wrong. The marketing materials with it were dead wrong. Their understanding of the law was dead wrong, but I still like their motivation. So something we used to call in the military is good motivation, bad judgment. You ran really fast, but maybe in the wrong direction. But at least you ran fast, okay? So what they did great, and the reason I was so happy to see them make this effort, is so many people view compliance or the compliance role in a company as the brake pedal. And in a way that's right. I mean, when I was vice president of Remington Outdoor Company, I oversaw compliance. And often in meetings, I would be looked at as Mr. No. And I hated being that way. And I tried every time I could to not be the no guy and instead tried to come up with a creative solution on how to get around something or have a strategic advantage. But even if I did have to be the brake pedal, when you're heading off a cliff, a brake pedal is nice to have. So what I loved seeing is that SilencerCo took some knowledge of federal firearms law, which is what you're learning by tuning in right now. They took some knowledge of federal firearms law and they exploited it. Good for them. And they found a technicality that allowed them to take not a rifle, but a gun, because it was a muzzle loader. And you guys learned last week that it's not a rifle because the definition of a rifle starts with a firearm. And we know a muzzle loader is not a firearm. So a rifle-barreled muzzleloader, a gun, and a silencer, or not technically a silencer, you'll see why, attached to the end of it, and they can ship it straight to your house. It is a way to get effectively a silencer shipped straight to your door because you don't need an FFL anymore. So I was just so excited to see them do that because, one, for the compliance geeks, they did their best at trying to find that nuance there, and I was so, so proud of them. But also the first second I saw it, I was, oh, good motivation, bad judgment. I immediately wrote an article for Recoil to help get the word out and explain and educate people on how they were right on the federal law, but they forgot about something. They forgot about state laws. So if you guys want to make a change and you're worried about losing your gun rights, which you should be because there's always an attack on it, stop focusing on the federal government. I shouldn't say that. I mean, don't ignore it, but stop focusing only on the federal government. That's a better way to say it. Because I hear so many people say things like, oh, we got Trump in office, we're safe now. No, you're not. Go ask somebody in California, in New Jersey, in Connecticut, in New York, how they like their AR-15s. They can't have them. Trump did nothing to save them. It's not Trump's fault. It's just a reminder that regardless of who's in the White House, your state can still ban certain things and can still infringe upon your Second Amendment rights. Whether it should be right or wrong, they do it. So you need to be focused on the state level because that's where it's going to get you. So SilencerCo made the mistake in making this product in focusing only on the federal law and forgetting about the state law. So like I said, immediately reached out to Recoil because I saw their press release on it. I said, guys, that's a problem. It's not legal in these states. I started rattling off the states and started telling them why. So I just wrote the article for Recoil explaining that, like in New Jersey, for example, the state law in New Jersey says that anything that expels a projectile is a firearm. So yeah, a BB gun in New Jersey is regulated as a firearm, which means this thing, even though it's a muzzleloader, New Jersey doesn't care about that federal definition. If it expels a projectile, which by the way it does, it's a firearm. So the whole nuance of trying to get it outside of the definition of firearm, yeah, worked at the federal level, but not the state level. And that's going to have a problem in all sorts of states, New Jersey, California, and on and on. So it slowly went from the Maxim 50 to the 49 to the 47 to the 45, and it was sad to see it happen, but man, I have represented hundreds of FFLs across the country, and maybe most of the major firearms manufacturers and distributors out there. Unfortunately, SilencerCo didn't reach out, so I need to send them an email and be like, hey guys, next time I'm here for you. I'm going to solve this whole problem for you in a 5-minute call. So you guys are going to be able to solve this problem in a 5-minute call in the future too, because you are listening to a show and educating yourself about the firearms laws. So let's talk about what exemptions they tried to exploit. And now that you know just right away that New Jersey, everything's a firearm if a projectile comes out of it. So the way they got around the law is, one, you can't ship a firearm in interstate commerce to somebody's house. Can't do that. The ATF has rules and regulations. There's laws that say you need to go through an FFL. But you know, because you listened to the last episode, that a muzzleloader, even if it was made this morning, is exempted as an antique firearm. Again, even if it's brand new, and therefore is not a firearm at all and doesn't follow the same rules that firearms have on the federal level. So federally, if you lived in a free American state, you can have this thing shipped to your doorstep. Well, a silencer. Let's talk about a silencer real quick. We included it in the definition of a firearm last episode. And it's really kind of weird that it's included, in my opinion, in 18 USC section 921, because as we covered last week, that's the section for the Gun Control Act. And we know that silencers are covered in the National Firearms Act. Well, silencers are kind of an anomaly. They're covered in both sections. So you'll actually see silencer regulations and laws that come from both areas of the law because it's covered in each area, which makes it doubly confusing. And another part about silencers that makes them really hard to deal with is, unlike a firearm where just the frame or receiver by itself would be the firearm, every part of a silencer is a silencer. That's right. So a baffle for a silencer, that is a silencer by itself. Now, this is where it gets confusing, is because you might know that silencers need to be serialized. So you would say, well, Ryan, there's a baffle right there, and you said that's a silencer, and silencers need to be serialized. Well, the ATF realizes that's absurd, so they say, well, no, only like the outer tube maybe needs to be serialized. Wait a minute, the law says silencers need to be serialized, and that's a silencer. So there's a lot of logical inconsistencies. I'm sorry, I don't have a good answer for you other than that's what you get when you're dealing with the government. So just know that every part of a silencer is a silencer. And let's also know what the definition is. So 18 USC section 921A24, which will be in the show's notes at triggerwordspodcast.com, says the term firearm silencer or firearm muffler means any device for silencing, muffling, or diminishing the report of a portable firearm, including any combination of parts designed or redesigned and intended for the use in assembling or fabricating a firearm silencer or firearm muffler, and any part intended only for use in such assembly or fabrication. So what this means is, if you made your own silencer at home, which, by the way, under federal law is perfectly legal, you just have to file the right paperwork first, but you can make your own silencer at home. If you made your own silencer at home with washers from Home Depot as baffles, well, when you go to Home Depot and you buy a bag of 20 washers and you come home and you take 10 of those washers and you set them on your workbench, you say, you know, these 10 washers I'm going to use for bolting my drill press to the concrete slab. Well, those 10 washers are still just washers. Now, when you take the remaining 10 washers and you set them on the other side of your workbench, you said, you know what, these are going to be used as baffles in my silencer. Well, once you designated those and intended those for use in the assembly or fabrication of a silencer, they just became silencer parts. So on your same workbench, those washers are just washers. The other washers are now silencer parts and need to be controlled as such. So be careful with your intent. I overextended that example a bit. Don't nitpick that apart, but you understand the point. But you got to be careful when you have the parts and what's going on with silencers. Well, the important part for the definition for tonight's discussion about the Maxim 50 is that in the definition, when as I read it, it said the report of a portable firearm. That means that if you had an industrial piece of equipment that was bolted to the ground that couldn't be moved unless you had a serious forklift, and you had it like maybe for the indoor testing for a manufacturer, and it made the report of the gun quieter. Maybe target snails will do that. You know, the bullet traps. Technically, that is a device that diminishes the report of a firearm, but it's not a silencer because it's not portable. It's bolted to the ground. It's not meant to be taken with the gun somewhere. It's actually too heavy or too big to be a silencer. Well, likewise, if you take what would normally be a silencer and you weld it on to the end of a muzzleloader so that it can't be used on a firearm because it's permanently attached to the muzzleloader, well, then it can't be used to diminish the report of a portable firearm because it literally can't get onto a firearm, and therefore it's not a silencer. Now, you got to be careful, and I'm sure SilencerCo did this, and if they didn't, I hope they're listening. You got to be careful how you make the thing. If you make it first on the table and then you pick it up and screw it onto the muzzleloader and weld it on, you didn't unsilencer that thing. It's still a silencer because you made a silencer first. You can't just weld a silencer somewhere. So then be careful how they assemble the things. They never quite make a silencer first and then weld it on, but they make it permanently attached. Now, you might be saying, Ryan, you could just cut that thing off and thread it and put it on the gun and you got yourself a silencer. Yeah, you could. You could do the same thing with an oil filter, though. So it's not a problem that something is out there that could be used as a silencer, because the ATF is going to see that as you went through effort to cut it off and thread it and put it on, which that action right there would be you putting in the labor to make a silencer, which again is perfectly legal if you do the right paperwork. So really, you could get one of those SilencerCo Maxim50s. You could file the right paperwork to make a silencer. Once you got permission, arguably you could cut it off and thread it and use that thing as a silencer. It would save you a heck of a lot of time. Matter of fact, that might be a neat marketing pitch, is to sell a non-silencer for people that want to have the ready-made kit, and it sure as heck is going to last longer than making one out of, you know, pipe and washers. So you could do that, but because it was permanently attached, it wasn't a silencer. So that's how they got around the law of it not being a firearm or a rifle, and that's how they got around the law of it not being a silencer, because it was permanently attached. And so federal law, it was genius. State law, what are you going to do? The other problem with state law is it can change like that. You got to be careful. That's also why I'm very hesitant to give opinion on state laws. One, there's a great chance I'm not licensed as an attorney in your state. But two, to stay on top of every single law that changes when it changes, the state level, especially at the town or local level, is almost impossible. By the time you learned everything, they're all going to change. So I hope you learned something. I hope we had some application from the last episode of what a firearm is and things like that. And you just saw a real world example about how you can do something creative and how mistakes can be made. So the next example, someone sent me this today, and since they sent it to me, I've seen it in a couple more places. So I appreciate the readers, or not readers, you guys are listeners. Sorry, I say readers because I'm all into writing books now, which, by the way, shameless plug, Long Range Shooting Handbook has been the best-selling book in its category now. I think it's been 21 months. I actually think it's the longest best-selling book in a category on Amazon for that many months straight. And it's because you guys, you're awesome. Thank you, thank you, thank you. But those guys that buy the book and support that, those are readers. You guys listening, you're listeners. So for the listener that sent this in, I appreciate it. I'm not saying your name because you didn't say I could. I don't want to out you. But if you want me to say it, I'll give you some credit next time. But I was sent a screen capture from Springfield Armory's website. And man, Springfield Armory is doing the same thing. They are trying to be cute. They're trying to do something right. Good motivation, bad judgment. They are now taking the Springfield Saint AR-15, which if you haven't heard of yet because you're not watching marketing, a whole other side conversation is how they're billing the Saint as like the most revolutionary new thing ever. It's an AR-15 by Springfield Armory. That's what it is, okay? So AR-15. They are joining the bandwagon and making the AR-15 pistol, which personally, and you might guys get mad at me for this, I think is one of the stupidest things ever. They're hard to use, hard to aim. You lose all the ballistic properties of a .223 when you get down to like 7-inch barrels what this thing has. That thing's just going to be shooting balls of fire. But I digress, getting away from that. They came out with an AR-15 pistol, and they put one of the arm braces on it, which is like, it's not a shoulder stock. Remember, the definition of a rifle says it's going to be designed and intended to be fired from the shoulder. So if you put one of these arm braces on it, well, now it's not designed and intended to be fired from the shoulder. I mean, if you put a device on the back of a rifle that was designed and intended to be fired from your forehead, then it wouldn't be a rifle. It's got to be your shoulder. Even designed and intended to be fired from the center of your chest, I think you could argue is also not a rifle. And if it's not a rifle, then it can't be a short-barreled rifle. It's kind of an interesting nuance there. So that's how the SIG brace thing works. The SIG came out with the brace first, but now everyone's making them. It's not designed and intended to be fired from the shoulder, which means it can't be in the category of a rifle. And if it's not in the category of a rifle, then it doesn't matter how long the barrel is, or in this case, how short the barrel is. It can't ever be a short-barreled rifle if it's not a rifle. Now, the ATF came out for a little bit and said that you can't shoulder those things, and they were dead wrong. And I was maybe a little too aggressively taking them to the task in person in a meeting with the ATF over this with the firearms industry about how wrong they were. And I got explained later about the nuances, and I tried to help them out politically to get it done right. But again, that's a future episode. Add that one to the list of that story. But they finally came back out and came to their senses and said, no, of course we can't stop you from shooting at your shoulder. Because they're right. The law says what it was designed and intended to do. Just because you did it doesn't change it. And my example I gave to the ATF at that point, I said, okay, fine. A rifle is a rifle, like a real rifle with a real buttstock that's designed and intended to be fired from your shoulder. I asked them, if I put it on my forehead and pull the trigger, is it still a rifle? And they said, well, yeah. I said, well, hold on now. I'm not firing it from my shoulder. They said, well, yeah, but it was designed and intended to be fired from your shoulder. And I went, aha, it's the initial intent, not how you use it after the fact. If I can't unrifle a rifle by shooting it out of my shoulder, you can't make a non-rifle into a rifle by firing it from your shoulder. And I think their eyes went crossed a little bit, but they finally came around to it. So the Springfield Armory Saint, the problem I have with it is, think back to last episode. We talked about the definition of a handgun. And I did it quickly, but I mentioned that it is a firearm that's designed and intended to be fired with one hand. Now, you might fire a handgun with two hands when you have the chance, but that's not the federal definition. The federal definition is designed and intended to be fired with one hand. I don't know how the AR-15 arm braces work, because technically that's to be fired from one hand and your forearm, but at least it's not two hands, so I digress on that one. But I have had conversations with clients of mine, which shall remain nameless, that's the whole point, of not calling the handguard a handguard on an AR-15 pistol. Instead, calling it a barrel shroud or calling it something other than a handguard. Because to me, you call it a handguard, you're already admitting that that's for your second hand. And if you use two hands, you're now jumping into an NFA class called AOW, or any other weapon, which add that to the list of future episodes we'll talk about. So that's why if you take a handgun and you put a vertical foregrip on it, you just made an NFA firearm, because you now just converted its design and intent, or redesign by you is what the ATF calls it, to use two hands. You take a Glock and you put a vertical pistol grip on the forward rail, you just made an NFA firearm and you could get in serious trouble. You take an AR-15 pistol and you put a vertical foregrip on the handguard, you just made an NFA firearm and you may be in serious trouble. Now, for some reason, the ATF has said that the Magpul angled foregrip is not a foregrip. I don't understand it, but I'm not going to question it. I mean, fine. I guess you can get away with it. But the point is, you don't put in your marketing materials companies, hey, and this front part is great for your other hand. I mean, there's even companies out there that make chassis for handguns that'll have parts that'll say, for resting your thumb on the front. And I have to run to them screaming, no, you can't tell me that the manufacturer designed and intended for the left hand to be used, well, I'm right-handed, the support hand to be used on the gun also at another spot, because you're admitting that your design intent was for two hands, which means it can't be a handgun. So Springfield Armory of the Saint, guess what they said? In the marketing materials on their website, they brag about their handguard in the front will help for stability when firing it with two hands. I know it's not the biggest deal in the world. I'm probably one of the only firearm compliance legal geeks out there that loses their mind when they see that. But man, why would you even try to do that? Why would you, from the start, do that? Because now when somebody gets in trouble for it and they're in court, they're not going to be able to say, no, that's not an SBR. No, that's not an AOW. No, that's not a whatever because of the manufacturer's intent. When the manufacturer went out of their way to say the intent was to include firing with two hands, which means it's not a handgun. Come on, folks, let's not do that. So I'm looking at some of the comments that came on Facebook. I'm going to try and catch up to them real quick. I'm coming to an end on the podcast. I'm trying to keep them short. A few of you have complained to me about how short these are. I'm sorry. I'm experimenting here. I figure some people might want to hear this in their commute to work, and I thought a half hour might be good. Steven says, I mentioned that felons can't possess brass. Wouldn't that also apply to powder and bullets? Absolutely, Steven. Also primers. So all four major components of ammunition, just like silencers, are all ammunition by themselves. Kyle tuned in for this. It wasn't for Game 7. Thanks, Kyle. I appreciate making it here. Bryant asks, can you take a stripped AR-15 lower receiver, build it into a rifle, and then at some point in the future, rebuild it into a pistol legally? Ooh, that's a complicated one. Bryant, I promise we will cover that in a future episode, and that'll be the whole topic for the future episode. Okay, so stay tuned, bud. Drew said, you can beat the rep, but not the ride comes to mind. The cops, unless they're gun guys, won't know the nuances and probably take you in. Oh, yeah, you're right, Drew. I mean, in Connecticut, when I used to live there, thank God I'm out of that state. When I used to live there, silencers were legal. They were allowed. Every other gun was banned, but silencers were legal. And I think the only reason they're legal is because the legislators didn't know they were. I used to tell people to shut up about poking the bear about silencer legislation. By the way, some federal legislation comes to mind. It's just let it be. Yeah, it sucks, but it's not that bad, and all you're going to do is make everyone aware. I bet in Connecticut, if you went to the legislators in the lobby, real lobbying, and said, hey, did you know silencers are legal here? They would all be surprised and then immediately do something to stop them, because a big chunk of police officers in Connecticut that I would train or work with or be around had no clue silencers were legal. And in fact, Drew, they would look me straight in the eyes and say, no, silencers are illegal. You can't, citizens can't own silencers. They would arrest you on the side of the street, not even knowing their own laws. So yes, you're right. You got to be careful. And Drew, you had another comment, unless the overall length is over 26 inches. Yes, you're right. But I'm trying to cover the basics. We'll get into the nuances later. You're absolutely right. That's the challenge for this podcast, is I'm going to have to cover just enough to explain it without too much about diving in deep, because, man, one conversation could just lead into the next 20 and get deep there. Oh, no, apologies, Drew. You're on point, man. These are the comments I want. That's perfect. That'll remind me of the topics to get into to cover everything. Matter of fact, I'm going to take some license here as I sign off the podcast and I finish it up. I might tell you something that's not exactly 100% correct, but it's correct enough to make the point. I'm not going to lie to you. But I might overstate or understate a certain topic just to make a point there. So that doubly reinforces my disclaimer. This is not legal advice, okay? Do not rely on what I'm saying legally. I'm trying to explain concepts, and eventually you guys are going to be so educated on this that I might regret doing it, because then I'm not going to be in such high demand to help solve these problems in the firearms industry, because you guys are going to know what you're doing with. And I tell you what, being armed with knowledge, man, good for you guys. Thanks for tuning in. I appreciate all the support you guys are giving to everything else. Please go tell friends about this podcast. This is part of the Firearms Radio Network. Sean Heron runs the Firearms Radio Network, and I made some bold claims about how good this podcast is going to do and about how popular it's going to be. And the only way it's going to get popular is if you tell people about it and keep sharing the words. You guys already, the downloads are off the charts. Surprising, flattering, awesome. You guys are doing great. But that's how we measure the success of a podcast. And we're going to get some sponsors and make this more fruitful for everybody and encourage me to keep doing it is the number of downloads for each episode. So if you share the word and you like this free education, you like this free show, the way you can thank me is, one, share the word of this podcast either through links on social media, just telling your friends to come check us out, because we see all those downloads, we see those numbers, and it helps bolster it. It helps me not look completely stupid with my huge, bold claim I made in front of Sean's face. So help me win that bet with Sean. But also, I appreciate if you support my other projects. Support my book, The Long Range Shooting Handbook, on Amazon. The next book I'm still trying to get out. I write articles for Gun Digest and Recoil and Carnivore and sometimes other blogs. Check them out, like them. Ask me, questions if you have. I love the communication. I love the ideas for topics. And also my two newest projects, Rocket FFL, which brings you this podcast. Man, you can get an FFL, and you can get an FFL out of your home. Matter of fact, most FFLs are home-based. So if you like saving money on guns, because you can buy them now at wholesale prices, and now you like making money on guns, because now you can sell them for a profit, and you can also be the go-to guy in your circle of firearms friends when people want new gun stuff or want to check out stuff, you want to do that, you can do it. And it's a lot cheaper than you think. You can go to Rocket FFL and get the training you need to get set up right, so you're not screwed down the road and then have to come to me as an attorney and I'm going to charge you way more per hour to help you get out of trouble. You can go get a course on how to get your FFL and become an SOT for like $50. And then you can get your Type 1 dealer's license for $200 for the first 3 years and $90 for every 3 years after that. Guys, you sell a couple Glocks, you're going to make that money back. Trust me, look into it. It's actually kind of a cool process. I have my FFL and I love it. And my other project that came out with 2 weeks ago is Rocket CCW. Yes, I get it. I like the rocket thing. But Rocket CCW is the coolest one going. I wish I would have thought about it a while ago. Is it gets you a CCW that allows you to carry in over half the country in less than 20 minutes. So you don't have to go find a course and drive to the course and schedule it and make sure it's on, it fits within your calendar and pay a couple $100 and sit there for 8 hours while somebody tells you which end of the gun is the noisy end. You can do it in 20 minutes from your smartphone, wherever you want to sit in your house. You really can. Now, it may not work in your home state. You're probably going to have to get your own home state's permit, but this will work in 32 other states when you're traveling across the country. And man, it's just cheap and fast. Why don't you go check it out? Drew pointed out the Ranger Handbook too, and a bunch of other books. Drew, I appreciate your support, man. Yeah, I got a lot of stuff going on out there, and you guys supporting it all is what allows me to have the time to do these kind of things. So keep it up. Keep tuning in. Love what you guys are doing. Till next time, take care. Okay, if you guys are still tuned in on Facebook Live, I just ended the podcast. So here's your super exclusive post-show. I don't have anything planned. If you guys have any more comments or questions, great. I'm almost out of scotch, which means the show's almost over. I think we got the podcast about 30 minutes on the nose, which that's my goal. That's pretty cool. You guys are awesome. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you had a chance to catch me on This Week in Guns, which was a couple hours ago. Yeah, you guys, seriously, flattered, just so excited to see that you guys are out there and see all the comments and the people that are popping in right now. No, Steven, you rock. I'm not doing anything for you, man. You're the one supporting me, and all the rest of you guys are too. So everybody have a good night. I will try and announce when the next live event is going to be. So if you guys like to tune in again, then you can too. Also, if you haven't checked it out yet, check out the Going Ballistic podcast. That one's a podcast about guns and shooting long range and a little less gun laws, especially now that this podcast is out. So again, thanks everybody. Take care.